JBS presents exclusive television coverage of the 2016 Jerusalem Post Conference from the Marriott Marquis Hotel in New York City.
The Israeli ambassador to the United States, Mr. Ron Dermer, fellow ministers of Israel government, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. Earlier this month, Israel remembered the Holocaust and its sons and daughters who fell in the line of duty. We also celebrated 68 years of independence and achievement. So this is a good opportunity to take another look at the reality with which Israel has to contend. This reality is characterized by chronic instability, the collapse of the old order, the blurring of borders, the rise of violent non-state actors, Islamic extremism and terror, both Shiite and Sunni, extensive destruction, loss of life, and population displacement. Iran, with its extensive missile program, financial and military support for terror organizations, especially Hezbollah in Lebanon, and substantive involvement in the region continues to present the biggest state threat to Israel and to regional stability in the post-nuclear agreement period as well. Among the violent non-state actors, Hezbollah, which its arsenal of rockets and missiles continues to be the most potentially damaging for Israel, while the potential for another flare-up with Hamas in Gaza continues to be high. The Islamic State phenomenon, despite some successes in the campaign against it in Syria and Iraq, continues to present a serious threat and to extend in the region and beyond. Syria is a key arena. It is the focal point of the power struggle between the Shiite axis led by Iran and the Sunni camp led by Saudi Arabia. It is the focal point of the refugee problem facing neighboring countries like Jordan as well as Europe. And it is the focal point of terror coming from the Islamic State nerve center in Raqqa. Israel can't allow itself to relax its security posture in these circumstances. In the north, we must continue to firmly hold our red lines regarding the transfer of advanced weapon systems to the Hezbollah in Lebanon and hostile activity against Israel from the Syrian side of the border in the Golan Heights. In the south, we must also deal firmly with the underground threat by what we call offensive tunnels dug by Hamas from the Gaza Strip and continue efforts to expose and demolish them in our sovereign territory. We must also remain vigilant against the Islamic State threat and take part with intelligence, mostly in the international campaign against it. And finally, Iran. The nuclear agreement must be monitored and verified. Its missile program must be limited, and it must be pressure to cease its military and financial support to terror organizations which target Israel. International pressure must be applied on Hezbollah, which was recently declared a terror organization by the Arab League as well as the Gulf Cooperation Council, in order to seriously weaken it and reduce its damage potential. The United States has done a lot in this regard, but we need to keep increasing the pressure and to implement the sanctions now in order to prevent devastation later. If Hezbollah will use its arsenal against the Israeli civilian population and infrastructure, it will leave Israel no alternative but to respond with great overwhelming force against the organization and against Lebanese villages, towns, and cities where Hezbollah's rockets and missiles, military infrastructure, and command and control centers are located. But the real challenge in these difficult circumstances is also to identify practical opportunities for constructive action, to recognize what is not possible now and do what is. This is what I'm doing as Minister of Transportation and Intelligence. So, while our region continues to experience an upheaval of historical proportions, I'm working to connect Israel overland to Jordan and the countries in the east, the Arab countries in the east. The transportation projects that I'm advancing are turning Israel's Haifa port and railroad into a commercial gateway and lead bridge to the east by the old historic Valley train route from Haifa to Bet She'an. This project will be completed in October. It will begin to work. And from there, from Bet She'an, there will be continue later on to the border with Jordan, a Sheikh Hussein crossing. Turkish goods are already being transported by trucks to the east through the Haifa port. This is not a dream. It's happening now in those days. More than this, we intend to connect the Palestinians from the Jenin area to the eastbound railway network and the port of Haifa. 2 new deep water ports are also being built now in Haifa and Ashdod. This will position Israel better vis-à-vis both regional and global transportation routes and markets. In the intelligence and security arena, we need to weaken and deter enemies, empower moderates, encourage potential friends, embrace allies, and advance regional integration. The strategic challenge is to acknowledge what we cannot do and do what we can. And last but not least, and most dramatically, I'm working to advance a plan for the creation of an international artificial island with a port 3 miles off the coast of Gaza, which will be connected by a bridge to the coast for the passage of people and goods. This offshore island project, where countries in the region and international arena could take part, would provide Gaza with a controlled economic and humanitarian gateway to the world without risking Israel's security. This program could go a long way to relieving the pressure on the nearly 2 million Palestinians inhabitants of the pressure cooker known as the Gaza Strip, while also further disengaging it from Israel. It's about time. Israel, my friend, can be both a buffer and a bridge. This is my vision. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Steve, very much. It's a pleasure to be with you. I want to start by saying that I'm an enthusiast of the Jerusalem Post, and I am so glad to be able to come to a conference where so many ideas are discussed. My wife Maria is with me here today. It's her birthday this weekend. I just wanted to recognize her. But let me just say, on our committee, on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, what we have been able to do with the hearings that we have put forward, with the evidence that we bring forward, is to unite our committee and I'm going to give you a couple of examples. One was my recent legislation on sanctions against Hezbollah, which we passed with large bipartisan majorities. I only wish, and we put together, myself and Elliot Engel, and we worked together on these initiatives, right? Elliot worked with me to pass this legislation that would give the Ayatollah a choice between economic collapse or real compromise on his nuclear program several years ago. It was widely reported in the Jerusalem Post and the New York Times. I only wish, after we had passed that with such a decisive vote, that the administration had not blocked it in the United States Senate. Because I think after 30-some hearings, 30 hearings on this problem, I can tell you at the end of the day, we have not changed the attitude in Iran. When you hear the chants of death to America, death to Israel, when you notice that the focus is on America as the great Satan. Israel's only the little Satan in this equation. America is the great Satan for the Ayatollah, if you've heard any of his recent speeches. And I would suggest to you that all of us have a responsibility to work together to educate better and inform better people not only in the United States but around the world as to the true challenges involved. I would also share with you that we have passed legislation through the committee to improve Israel's qualitative military edge. We are working right now to pass legislation to assist on this MOU and make certain that inside that MOU is the support that Israel will need for missile defense systems. And I will say to you this: the American public support a strong U.S.-Israel relationship. So does the Congress of the United States. But we need to get more information in front of the public. And I'm just going to give you a story by way of an example of what I've learned as chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee. I was asked a couple of years ago, 2013, myself and Elliot Engel, we had taken a bipartisan delegation to Israel. I insist that Republicans and Democrats travel together and learn together. And in this meeting, I think we had maybe a half dozen in the delegation, 7 members. We were meeting with Abbas, the special envoy, had asked us to meet with President Abbas. And after the pleasantries were over, I asked him a question because I had heard a translation 2 months before of a speech in which he had again denied the Holocaust. And I had photographs that my father had taken at Dachau, and I handed him the photographs, and I asked him if he still denied the existence of the Holocaust. And he said, well, regardless of what happened then, it's no excuse for what's happening now. And I said, well, that's why I want to talk to you. Because what is happening now, the incitement, the rhetoric that you are using now, is so reminiscent of the incitement used in the 1930s. Something caused the Holocaust. Something created a situation in which 6 million people lost their lives. 6 million Jews lost their lives. And my question is why that language would be used by you today if the goal is to create coexistence between the Jewish people and the Palestinian people. And in the middle of this discussion we were having, I looked over his shoulder and I saw a map. And I said, by the way, President Abbas, where is Israel on your map? He said, where's your map? Show me your map. I think the point here, is that in order to create a climate of peace, we really have to have leaders in this world that rather than push incitement, are having a genuine dialogue. And my question, because when the discussion was over, and of course Elliot Engel did a magnificent job of arguing this point, and Nita Lowy asked, why are you poisoning the minds of the children, of the next generation? And by the way, when we went back, we worked on legislation together in order to have the leverage to cut back that support, cut back that aid, in order to use that, in order to demand that incitement stop in the textbooks. But here's my question, because when we walked out, our special envoy said, you know, the meetings don't usually go like that. And I asked, why not? If you're not pushing on these themes, how can it be that for 20 years we have been funding the Palestinian Authority? How can it be that those are the broadcasts, and this broadcast, the particular one, was on an Iranian-owned station that was done into Lebanon? How can it be that he's doing those broadcasts? How can it be that this is in the textbook? Why haven't we used our considerable leverage? And the commitment that I think the members of the House had was to try to change the direction of this. But we have to have the American public understand the challenge here. And you play a major role in that. The BDS movement, as Elliot and I have gone on campuses in order to try to speak to the student body and explain the complexities of the Middle East policy. But when people aren't hearing the other half of the story, and when I say not hearing the other half of the story, in 2006, when the missiles were slamming into Israel, I went up to Haifa. My wife was in Jerusalem. I left her in Jerusalem. I went up to Haifa, and we took time to interview those who were in the trauma hospital. 600 victims there. And I was trying to get the media to tell their side of the story, because what the media was concentrating on was the counter battery fire as Israel tried to silence those rockets and missiles, and the story about, you know, those Hezbollah families who had a rocket launcher in their backyard and now were collateral damage. And what I wanted was balance in that story. And I remember having this discussion with a reporter from the BBC. And I remember her saying, no, I know, but I called my editor when you suggested that, and he said that would not be balanced. I said, come down to Haifa, you know, come down to the Rambam Trauma Hospital. There are Arab Israelis, there's Jewish Israelis, there's Druze Israelis, they're all victims. Interview whoever you want, but tell that part of the story. When I called my wife about this, she said, take a plastic bag and put that shrapnel, put those ball bearings in it. go on television and do a little bit of guerrilla theater to get the point across, and they'll cover it. They'll have to cover it. And we did that on CNN and on other stations, on Fox and so forth. But we have got to get out there, my friends, and tell the story about what is going on in terms of this incitement. That's one thing the Jerusalem Post does. The wider story that we have to remind people, and I've had 31 hearings now on this issue of Iran, the wider story is the support out of Iran that goes into the assistance to the Muslim Brotherhood, to Hamas, to overthrowing our allies in Yemen, to putting Quds forces on the border in Syria, on the border with Israel, on the threat that we read about in the Wall Street Journal, where they're attempting to transfer the technology, the GPS capability, into the hands of Hezbollah. I can tell you that that would be a game changer, and we have to prevent that. That agreement was supposed to guarantee, and I was a critic, I led the fight against it, but it was supposed to guarantee no transfer for 6 years, or 5 years and 8 years on the missiles and on this conventional weapon capability. And here we are today with the administration saying, well, at the 11th hour up at the United Nations, instead of going through Congress, we had to agree to a change. And that change changed the words from Iran shall not to the words Iran shall be called upon not to. And now the Ayatollah is pointing to that, and he's saying that's why we can go forward with our ICBM program. That's why we can launch these tests with the words Israel must be destroyed, not only in Farsi, but also in Hebrew on the side of the This is their argument. And this is why we must be more engaged in having people follow the details of what's going on in these negotiations. And I can add one other point to this. We have to be very careful, based upon my experience and my discussions with President Abbas, that we do not end up at the United Nations with an agreement in which there is not a demand for security. My concern is that the administration might, instead of allowing this to be negotiated between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, might allow this French authored initiative to go forward, recognizing a Palestinian state, no security guarantees for Israel, and all of a sudden we are dealing in a situation where we can see the incitement on a daily basis of people calling upon youth to go out and commit attacks against Jews. My father said one thing to me that I've always tried to keep in mind. He said this after he heard a speech translated from the Ayatollah. And what he said was, when somebody says that they're going to kill 6 million Jews, in the 1930s, there might have been some excuse to believe that that was an exaggeration. Before we went into those camps, there might have been some excuse. But after what happened in the Holocaust, there is no excuse for us not accepting the word of anybody on this planet who says death to Israel. And by the way, let's add death to the United States. If that's their message and that's their intention, and we watch them proliferate weapons and Quds forces and try to overthrow governments in the region, what do we think is going to happen if we don't stand up to this? So have your sons and daughters, nieces and nephews on the campuses. Get out there and support the effort to educate people, get them involved with respect to this BDS movement on the campuses. And lastly, just remember this: every spending bill originates in the House of Representatives. So as we work with this MOU, we are going to make certain that our ally, who developed at probably 10% what it would have cost us in terms of the Iron Dome, that, by the way, is now used by the U.S. and our allies, including in Korea, That's used all over the planet, except that we would not have developed it, my friends. You know why? Because we didn't think it was possible to hit a bullet with a bullet that way. But because of the ingenuity in Israel, they did. They developed it. It was effective. And I just will add one more point. When people tell you about the disproportionate use of force in order to stop Hamas, we sat down, we actually had testified before a committee, American generals and an admiral who had gone over there to witness that. And they said it was amazing that the United States probably could not have conducted operations under the constrained rules that Israel was trying to use in order to minimize. Now here's what Elliot Engel and I saw. We went into those tunnels, and the tunnel we were in came up underneath a school. It was clear to us that the intention of Hamas was to capture those children and try to take them into Gaza and to make the IDF fight block by block by block to get them free. That is the reality. By the way, we went back with this evidence, passed a resolution in solidarity with Israel off the floor of the House and condemning the use of human shields by Hamas. But I just share with you, that's the challenge ahead. So let's get the information out, and thank you, Jerusalem Post, for the invitation here for me to speak today.
Thank you. Also a former columnist at the Jerusalem Post. You can give a hand to the Jerusalem Post. I know it's been a long day. It's a real pleasure to be here at this annual conference. I didn't have the opportunity for the last 2 years, but I'm glad I'm here now. I want to thank Steve. Where is Steve Lindig? Where is Steve? He's somewhere probably backstage. Steve, I want to thank you for your time at the helm of the Jerusalem Post. During your tenure, the Post continued to be a paper that could be relied upon to report the news accurately and which maintained a firewall between news and opinion. And that's no small feat in the news business today. So thank you. I also want to congratulate Katz on becoming the paper's new editor. Knowing both your professionalism and your character, I have no doubt that you will be able to add to the impressive legacy left by your predecessors. In addition to Steve, those predecessors include David Horowitz, one of the finest journalists in Israel, and Bret Stephens, one of the best columnists in America. But Yaakov, of all your distinguished predecessors, the one I most admire is the late David Bar-Ilan. In defending Israel and defending the truth, there was no pen sharper than David's. I remember reading his editorials and columns when I was a student at university. Each one was a work of art. And I was later privileged to meet David several times before he died, sadly, well before his time. Now, for those of you who don't know, David Bar-Ilan was a classical pianist of tremendous erudition who moved to Israel to become editor of the Post. But when this maestro musician and lover of literature crossed over to the world of hard news and complex politics, he did not seem to have any problem separating fact from fiction. Today in the news business, this distinction is often blurred. In the world of fiction, narrative counts. In the world of fact, truth counts. In the world of fiction, there are made-up characters and manufactured plot lines. In the world of fact, there are real people with real histories and real futures. And most importantly, in the real world, there are real consequences to not getting the story straight. Ladies and gentlemen, in a world of fiction, Iran's regime pits moderates like Rouhani and Zarif against hardliners like Khamenei and Soleimani. In a world of fact, Iran under Rouhani hangs gays, jails journalists, and executes more political prisoners than ever. In a world of fiction, Iran will seek to reconcile with the United States after the nuclear deal and become a partner for solving problems in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and elsewhere in the region. In the world of fact, Iran is vowing to remain an enemy of the United States and is wreaking havoc throughout the Middle East. In a world of fiction, a richer Iran will curb its aggression, end its support for terrorism, and stop trying to annihilate Israel. In the world of fact, a richer Iran is dispatching troops and proxies throughout the region, shipping arms to Hezbollah and the Houthis, hosting Holocaust denial contests, and test-firing ballistic missiles inscribed with threats to wipe Israel off the map. But when it comes to blurring fact and fiction, the case of Iran's Ayatollah regime is nothing compared to the decades-long obfuscation that has marked the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. In a world of fiction, Israel is not prepared to make peace with the Palestinians. In the world of fact, 6 Israeli prime ministers since Oslo have tried and failed to make peace with the Palestinians, despite sweeping proposals that offered the Palestinians everything they told the world they wanted. In a world of fiction, Prime Minister Netanyahu is not prepared to negotiate with President Abbas. In the world of fact, President Abbas has avoided negotiations for the last 7 years. In a world of fiction, settlements are the obstacle to peace, and Israel is ethnically cleansing the Palestinians. In the world of fact, our conflict predates the building of settlements in post-1967 Israel by 50 years. The Palestinian population in the territories captured in the Six-Day War has grown at least threefold. And those who advocate ethnic cleansing are those that insist that a future Palestine be Judenrein. In a world of fiction, Israeli soldiers are war criminals. In the world of fact, the IDF deserves the Nobel Peace Prize for the efforts its commanders make and the risks In a world of fact, the IDF deserves the Nobel Peace Prize for the efforts its commanders make and the risks its soldiers take to keep Palestinian civilians out of harm's way. In a world of fiction, it is Israel that has an extremist, brutal, and bloodthirsty society. In the world of fact, Hamas terrorists rule Gaza. Abu Mazen welcomes every drop of blood spilled in Jerusalem. Palestinian children are educated to hate Jews, and Palestinian public squares are named after mass murderers. In a world of fiction, there never was a temple on the Temple Mount, and the Jewish people are foreign colonialists in the land of Israel. In the world of fact, the Temple of Solomon was built by the son of David 3,000 years ago in Jerusalem, and what the world calls the West Bank is the same Judea and Samaria where the patriarchs of the Jewish people prayed, where the prophets of the Jewish people preached, and where the kings of the Jewish people ruled. Ladies and gentlemen, confusing fact and fiction on the Palestinian issue can have real-world consequences for Israel. In a world of fiction, the leading powers of the world will gather together 2 weeks from now to help advance the peace process. In the world of fact, the leading powers of the world will unwittingly enable the Palestinians to continue avoiding negotiations. In a world of fiction, these powers will create a framework that will ultimately help Israelis and Palestinians make peace. In the world of fact, these powers, albeit with the best of intentions, will only encourage the Palestinians to continue their nearly 100-year-old campaign to destroy the one and only Jewish state. In a world of fiction, powers whose citizens live far away know better than the people of Israel what is in Israel's interests and what must be done to keep Israel safe. In the world of fact, these powers are ignoring the will of a free people who live in the most endangered democracy on earth and whose sons and daughters defend that democracy every day. Now, I think it's important to leave fiction behind and state a few facts clearly that bear repeating, particularly on the eve of the formation of a new government in Israel. The fact is that Iran remains the greatest danger to Israel and is as committed as ever to destroying Israel. Last year at the United Nations, Prime Minister Netanyahu laid out a policy based on three principles that could unite both those who supported and opposed the nuclear deal with Iran. First, keep Iran's feet to the fire by making sure it does not violate the deal. Second, confront Iran's regional aggression. And third, dismantle Iran's terror network around the world. The international community has not yet translated those principles into policy. Among other things, such a policy would mean responding forcefully to Iran's ballistic missile tests, increasing sanctions against Iran for its support for terrorism and illegal arms transfers, and shining a spotlight on Iran's gross human rights violations. For its part, Israel will continue to work so that that policy is implemented. A second fact is that Israel remains committed to peace with the Palestinians and will continue to insist that only direct negotiations can achieve that goal. The vision of Prime Minister Netanyahu for peace remains the very same vision he laid out at Bar-Ilan University. Not simply two states, but two states for two peoples, in which a demilitarized Palestinian state recognizes the Jewish state of Israel. Israel believes that the convergence of its interests with the interests of many of the Sunni Arab states provides an opportunity to help advance peace with the Palestinians, as well as broader reconciliation with the Arab world. At the same time, Israel will vigorously oppose any effort by outside parties to impose terms to resolve our conflict. Such an effort will not only prevent peace today, but by hardening Palestinian positions, it could prevent peace for decades to come, and it will also contribute greatly to the effort to delegitimize Israel. There is one more fact that I would like to state today, when once again the values of Israel's democracy are under attack. In a free society, it is not a self-appointed few who are the conscience of a nation. In a democracy, the people are sovereign, and the nation's values are reflected in its freely chosen leaders, protected by independent courts and preserved by checks and balances. In a world of fiction, Israel's democracy is in imminent danger. In the world of fact, Israel has maintained its highest values under the most challenging conditions, and Israel's democratic institutions, including a free and vibrant press, remains as strong as ever. Ladies and gentlemen, it is times like this when the world predictably rushes to defame and demonize Israel that I am proudest to serve Israel. Because despite being the most maligned country on earth, Israel is the most remarkable country on earth. Not perfect, but remarkable. with a people who are moral and compassionate, with soldiers who are brave and decent, with institutions that are sound and resilient, and with a prime minister that I know is as determined as ever to secure Israel's future. Someone once said that if the story of Israel were submitted as a movie script, it would be rejected for being too fantastic to believe. After all, the restoration of sovereignty in our ancestral homeland after 2,000 years, the return of the exiles of our people from across the globe, the defense of Israel against implacable enemies, and the transformation of Israel from a desert backwater to a global technological power seems to defy both history and logic. But ladies and gentlemen, Israel is not a work of fiction. Israel is a real country, and the people in Israel are real people. So whether you are citizens who live in Israel, a soldier who defends Israel, a friend who supports Israel, or a paper privileged to cover Israel, let's all remember how fortunate we are to live at a time when the Jewish people are once again writing our own story in our own land and once again determining our own future. Thank you.
There's only one person I know who can follow that speech and end this fantastic day. My friend, colleague, the one and only senior contributing editor of the Jerusalem Post, Caroline B. Glick.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Ambassador Dermer. Thank you all, dear friends, readers, Israel supporters. Thank you all for staying here till the end of the long conference and for waiting to hear from me. So, you know, we've heard, in fact, Ambassador Dermer was talking about narratives, and he is the diplomat and I am the columnist. So I want to do a little bit of naming names. Many of you heard read the profile of Ben Rhodes, the Deputy National Security Advisor to President Obama, where we found that we have a young man with no security background, with no foreign policy background, but what he does have is a background in creative writing. And he was brought in to shape the media strategy for selling President Obama's foreign policy, and he's done it extraordinarily well. And in fact, I think when you look at the profile of him in the New York Times, that you see that what he's doing is taking a victory lap, that he was able to succeed in his job, which is to manipulate public opinion in order to advance the foreign policy goal of President Obama. And he was successful in the very narrow sphere that he has defined as his area of operation. The problem is that when you're trying to sell a policy because you're supposed to win, you don't actually think about whether that policy is the right policy or not. When you block debate on what the right option for your country is going to be, when you have an army of hired guns who act as independent voices, but in fact are acting in concert with the White House and as its surrogates, then you're blocking debate. You're blocking a population from becoming an informed population, which is the basis of democracy. And when you have journalists in Washington who are supposed to be experts in national security, who, as Ben Rhodes said, know literally nothing, and are coming to the White House for guidance and then mindlessly parroting the talking points that they're provided for by the White House or many of the dozens and dozens and dozens of think tanks, news organizations, public action committees, human rights committees, and so on and so forth that are claiming expert status on Iran, and they're all giving you the same lies based upon a narrative that says there are moderates against extremists, and you can either support the deal and get peace or oppose it and have war, then you have destroyed the profession of journalism. You have destroyed the profession of journalism. When you personalize the struggle and say it's our guy against Prime Minister Netanyahu, when you say that Republicans who oppose the deal are warmongers and the people who support it are for peace, you're not giving people the information they need to make choices. You're not having a policy debate at all. What you're having is a personalized attack against your opponents that's aimed on discrediting them in order to prevent them from making cogent arguments to the public and to themselves. This is extremely dangerous, and the fact that we've reached this point is something that we all have to stand back and examine ourselves as journalists, ourselves as citizens, ourselves as people who are concerned about real policy issues. Today, all day long, you've heard people from all across the ideological, the political spectrum, the cultural spectrum, people who deal with issues in a very serious way, who are committed to finding solutions to some of the many, many, many problems that Israel faces, that the free world faces as we move forward in the 21st century. What you heard is real people who are truly concerned and professional and qualified to deal with the issues that they're dealing with, trying to put together tactics and strategies for achieving the aim of making our world a better place. This is a serious debate that you heard here. Everybody here was serious. Where did we have that? Where do we have that today in the wider scope of journalism, not only in Israel, but in Europe and in the United States, throughout the Western world? I dare say we have what Ben Rhodes referred to as an echo chamber, and I have to tell you I am deeply, deeply distressed by this because, as Ambassador Dermer said, in a far more diplomatic way, we were sold a bill of goods by the administration, who is now openly admitting that the bill of goods was a deliberate manipulation of public opinion in order to sell a policy that on its own could never have passed because it makes no sense. Because all of the rationales that they gave were lies, right? They said that there was going to be the most intrusive inspections regime ever and that Iran wouldn't be able to cheat. As it works out, no inspections regime of suspected military sites. And Iran gets to decide what a military site is, meaning Iran gets to inspect itself or say you're not allowed to inspect us. So we have no idea, actually, how much nuclear material remains in Iran. And so on and so forth, down the line, as Congressman Royce was laying out today, whether it's in military equipment that they're able to transfer to Hezbollah, the repeated ballistic missile tests that they've taken since the deal was supposedly concluded, even though they never even signed it. You have the United States Secretary of State lobbying Europeans to do business with the Iranians. And you have Assad continuing to butcher his people, using chemical weapons against them in Syria, retaining power, again, as part of an American policy that was hidden from the public, to use the nuclear deal as a means, according to Rhodes, of walking away from America's alliance system with Israel and with the Sunni Arab states and embracing Iran. This would never have passed muster. It would never have been accepted by the American public had the American public known the truth. And this isn't only with regards to Iran, and it isn't only, as Ambassador Dermer discussed, with regards to the Palestinians. It's in regards to everything. Consider what happened in the South China Sea last week. China checkmated the U.S. Navy when they took over the disputed islands in the South China Sea, and it works out that the United States has no ability to retake the islands because China has outpaced the United States militarily, and nobody discusses it. the White House has put forward this idea of a pivot to Asia, right, that Obama is uniquely qualified to do in a way that none of his predecessors did. And so they don't want to discuss the fact that for the first time since World War II, the United States is no longer the dominant power in the Pacific Ocean. The impact and the implications of what just happened in China, in the South China Sea, for the U.S. economy are enormous. For free trade deals, when China now is stronger in the South China Sea than the United States, when it dominates the area. Nobody discusses it. The echo chamber in this case is not parroting lies. It's parroting the silence of the White House. So what do we do in these circumstances? How do you handle a situation where the vast majority of the information that you're being given is manipulation? What are you supposed to do when you're trying to have a discussion, an educated discussion about things, when the people who you're talking to, it's not that they're stupid, they're inundated by lies, posing as independent positions of experts, of journalists, who it works out like NPR received hundreds of thousands of dollars from a lobbying group for the Iran deal, Plowshares Foundation. What are you supposed to do? They have all their sources. The answer is you have to take responsibility for yourselves as citizens. In Israel, I believe that the public has in fact passed the Rubicon of relying on experts and elders who are our betters to tell us what we're supposed to think and how we're supposed to feel. And I think we see evidence of it in the governmental changes that we're witness to this week, and thank God for them. Because the truth of the matter, as Ambassador Dermer said, in a position where we are being force-fed lies, posing as fact, in order to confuse us about what the way forward is and what the actual policies and choices that we have to make as free people are, we have to rely on ourselves. If we go back to Groucho Marx's old joke, what are you going to believe, me or your own lying eyes? We have to understand that our eyes are not lying to us. And we have to trust in our instincts, and we have to understand that as free people, whether in Israel or in the United States, in Europe and on, we have to be able to trust what we see. And we have to be able to trust what we know about the nature of people, about our own people, and not be confused by people who say that we're evil because we're not perfect. Israelis are not perfect. Americans are not perfect. Here's a little secret. Your parents probably told you, you're not perfect either. None of us are. That's the difference between us and God. And we have to be willing to take an imperfect world, imperfect humanity, imperfect nations, and say we can see the relative disparities between our nation and ISIS, between Israel and Hamas. We have to be Israel and the PLO, Israel and Iran, Saudi Arabia and Iran, for all we care right now in terms of proliferation. We have to be willing to live with a world with imperfect choices, where decisions about war and peace are not a question that we get to decide when one side is fighting and determined to destroy us. We have to be willing to listen to them. We have to be willing to hear what they're saying, to filter out the noise and the propaganda posing as fact. Because if we don't, nobody will do it for us. A year after the Iran deal, we see that every single warning that was sounded against this deal was correct. Every single one of the promises that were made about this deal were lies. And yet here we are, a year out, and the United States is now acting as Iran's lobbyist in Europe. It's time, just as we're doing in Israel, it is time for the free people of the world to seek out, as you do, the sources of information that you know are not lying to you, that are independent, that are not selling you a bill of goods, that are not being bought and paid for. You have to be willing to seek it out, because unfortunately, as time goes by and as the threats against us mount, truth is becoming harder and harder to come by, as our anointed ones would rather blame their political opponents for the threats arrayed against their country, then look the enemy in the eye and say, we have to stand as one against you. I'm extremely worried, I have to tell you. This is the 5th year that we've been hosting these conferences, and I have to tell you that today I am very, very worried. After I read Ben Rhodes's article, it wasn't that he told me information that he didn't know. It was the triumphalism of it. It was that he was proud of what he did. It's that he wasn't capable of understanding that what he did was wrong, and that this can't go on. That was a truly frightening thing for me. This nihilism, this notion that it doesn't matter. What difference does it make? It makes a difference. It makes a difference. You know, the shortest book in the Bible is Obadiah. It's 21 verses. And it essentially says, right, that Israel is going to stand and we're going to survive, and the people who are siding with our enemies are not, because we stand for the truth. And the people who stand with us aren't just standing for poor little Israel, they're standing for civilization. And when we talk about fighting BDS, when we talk about fighting jihad, when we talk about fighting for free markets and trade without barriers and discrimination, what we're talking about is a way of life, not only of Israel, but of the entire free world. And if Israel is treated like a leper for being the paragon of everything that we aspire to, because it's not perfect, then it's not only Israel that's endangered, it's everybody. It's everything that we care about. It's all of the countries that we've come to rely on as the free world. And that's why it isn't only important that you stand with Israel because you care about Israel per se. Standing with Israel and caring about Israel is about caring about human freedom. It's about caring about liberty. And the more you stand with Israel, the more you're securing your own freedom and that of your countries for posterity. Thank you. Now, I'm the last speaker, and therefore I'm going to end it here. I'm just going to tell you, God bless you all for being truth seekers, for seeing beyond the veil, for understanding that lies are not truth, for understanding that facts are not fiction, for understanding that it's important to care about issues and to fight for what's right and not to make up a narrative that you can sell on the evening news. These things are extraordinarily important. The Israeli people have turned a corner on this. We understand that we can't keep looking to somebody else to solve our problems for us. After 68 years, the Israeli people understand that the solutions to our problem lies within us. And we are so glad that we have our friends in the United States, Jews and non-Jews, who recognize that as well. And we trust that together we are all going to stand, and at the end of the day, the future of the free world is not going to be the future of Edom, of the Edomites, as prophesied by Obadiah. It is going to be the future of all of us together to live in freedom, not because it's easy, but because it's right and because it's true. Thank you very much, and God bless you. Thank you. Thank you.